My name is Maya. The woman across from me, the human rights inspector they called Ms. Davies, slid a single photograph over the polished, cold-as-ice surface of the conference table. My heart was pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs, a drumbeat of pure dread, because I was certain I knew what it would be. I expected to see a still frame from the video, a blurry image of my classmate Aisha, her face contorted in pain as she was shoved in the cafeteria. But it wasn't that. It wasn't a picture of Aisha at all. It was a faded, curled photograph of my own mother, her smile shy and her eyes full of a light I hadn't seen in years. She looked impossibly young, maybe 17. Ms. Davies, a woman whose piercing gaze felt like it could see every secret I'd ever kept, pushed the picture closer to me. "We didn't come to Northwood High because of a viral video, Maya," she said, her voice a low, resonant hum that seemed to vibrate in the sterile air of the principal's office. "We came because of this." And in that single heart-stopping instant, the entire foundation of my life, the story of my quiet town, my predictable high school, the classmate I betrayed with my silence, and the very truth of who I was, cracked and then shattered into a million unrecognizable pieces. Before I continue, make sure to subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications, comment below, and leave your like. Helps a lot. Section 1. The Quiet Cruelty. To truly understand the seismic shock of that photograph, the quiet, devastating gravity in Ms. Davies's eyes, you have to understand the ecosystem of Northwood High. From the outside, it was the perfect suburban dream. Impeccably manicured lawns, a proud stone eagle guarding the entrance, the kind of high-performing school that real estate agents used as a primary selling point. But the beauty was a facade. Inside those hallowed halls, the school operated on a complex, unspoken social algorithm built on exclusion. The cruelty wasn't the loud, cinematic bullying you see in movies. It was 1,000 tiny paper-cut aggressions, a constant, venomous mist of microaggressions and quiet judgments that poisoned the very air we breathed. My friends and I, we weren't the perpetrators. We were just survivors. We were popular, not because we were cruel, but because we had perfected the art of being effortlessly pleasant and aggressively non-confrontational. We drove straight down the middle of the social highway, never signaling, never changing lanes, because it was the safest place to be. And then Aisha arrived. She transferred in at the beginning of our junior year, and the news rippled through the student body in hushed, coded whispers. "Did you hear? There's a new girl. Adopted. Her parents are, white." The first time she set foot in the sprawling, noisy cafeteria, a wave of silence followed her path. Aisha was black, with a cascade of beautiful tight curls and a bright, determined smile that seemed hell-bent on winning over a school that had already judged her. Her adoptive parents, the Millers, were well known and respected. Mr. Miller was a popular local dentist with a gentle demeanor. Everyone knew and liked them. But Aisha, their daughter, was an anomaly. Northwood wasn't a sundown town, no matter what the cable news pundits later screamed. But it was overwhelmingly, suffocatingly white. Aisha's very presence was a disruption to the town's comfortable, monochrome landscape. The cruelty began as a slow drip. Students, even some in my own circle, would ask if they could touch her hair, their voices a blend of fascination and condescension, as if she were a rare animal at a petting zoo. Teachers would deliver compliments that were just insults wrapped in a pretty bow. I'll never forget our English teacher telling her, "You're so articulate," with an air of genuine, profound surprise. Then came the blunt, invasive questions in crowded locker bays about her real parents, as if her personal history was a piece of public gossip. I saw it all. We shared AP history and calculus. We walked the same hallways every day. And I did nothing. My silence was a scream of complicity, a fact that would later curdle in my stomach like a sickness. I'd offer her a weak, pathetic, sympathetic smile from across a classroom, a gesture so useless it makes my skin crawl to remember it. I told myself it was better than joining in the ridicule. I told myself I was being neutral. But I was a coward, hiding behind the flimsy, selfish excuse of not wanting to make waves. Aisha, to her credit, tried to brave the storm. She answered the invasive questions with a grace I couldn't fathom, though I saw her smile grow tighter and more strained at the edges with each passing week. She threw herself into extracurriculars, joining the debate club and the art club, desperately trying to carve out a foothold in our social quicksand. But Northwood wasn't a place that made room for you. You either fit the pre-cut mold, or you were ground down until you did. The guys in my group, popular boys I'd known since we were building forts in kindergarten, started a running joke. They secretly nicknamed her the Project, as in the Miller's Little Charity Project. It was never said to her face, of course. It was all whispered in group chats and snickered behind cupped hands as she walked by. It was their way of branding her, of reducing her humanity to a social experiment they could look down on. The unofficial ringleader of this casual cruelty was Kyle. He was the king of Northwood High, star quarterback, conventionally handsome, and armed with a deep-seated casual arrogance that our school culture not only tolerated but actively rewarded. He seemed to take Aisha's very existence as a personal affront to the perfect, predictable world he reigned over. Her presence was an imperfection in his kingdom, a glitch in the matrix, and he seemed determined to correct it. He started with small acts of exclusion. Forgetting to share a textbook in class. Accidentally talking over her during discussions. Making a show of saving the seat next to him when she approached. Each act was a tiny paper cut, but together they were designed to make her bleed out, socially and emotionally. I watched it all happen, a silent spectator at a tragedy. I vividly remember one afternoon in AP History. Our teacher announced we had to get into groups for a major project. My friends and I immediately huddled up, our circle closing like a Venus flytrap. I glanced over my shoulder and saw Aisha standing alone. Her hopeful expression slowly dissolving as the seconds ticked by, leaving her an isolated island in a sea of chattering students. My heart twisted into a painful knot. A tiny brave voice in the back of my mind screamed at me. Go ask her. Just walk over there. It's the right thing to do. But then I looked at my friends, heard their easy, familiar laughter, and the chilling fear of their judgment, the fear of them turning to me and asking why her, was stronger than my conscience. I turned my back on her. The teacher eventually, and awkwardly, assigned her to a group of nervous freshmen. That night I cried in my room, the guilt of physical weight on my chest. I hated myself for my weakness. But the next day, I walked into school and performed the same act of cowardice all over again. The desperate need to belong, to stay safe inside the pack, was a drug, and I was a hopeless addict. Section 2. The elbow and the escalation. The day everything exploded was an ordinary Tuesday. The cafeteria air was thick with the smell of stale pizza and the collective anxiety of upcoming midterms. I was sitting at my usual table, right in the pulsating center of the room, prime social real estate. Kyle was holding court, loudly recounting some story from his weekend. A few tables away, Aisha was sitting with a couple of girls from the art club. She was laughing, her head thrown back, and for a fleeting, beautiful second, it looked like she had finally found a small corner of acceptance for herself. The sight of her happiness, her momentary peace, seemed to infuriate Kyle. He pushed his chair back and stood up, grabbing his empty tray. Gotta go practice, he announced to his audience. His path to the trash cans took him directly behind Aisha's chair. There was an ocean of space to walk around her. He didn't take it. I saw the decision flicker in his eyes, a flash of pure, unadulterated malice. As he passed, he swung his elbow out, a sharp, deliberate, and forceful jab that slammed into her side. It wasn't a nudge or a bump. It was a targeted assault. You could hear the sickening thud of the impact over the low din of the room. Aisha cried out, a sharp yelp of pain, as her tray clattered to the floor. Milk, tater tots, and ketchup packets scattered everywhere. The entire cafeteria didn't go silent, but our section did. Everyone at our table, and the tables nearby, saw it. It was undeniable. No one could pretend they hadn't. Aisha was hunched over, clutching her ribs, her face a mask of utter shock and searing pain. Her eyes, glistening with tears, darted around the faces near her, desperately searching for anyone, just one person, to acknowledge what had just happened. And then her gaze landed on me. We locked eyes for what felt like an eternity. She wasn't just looking at me. Her stare felt like it was boring a hole right through my soul, seeing every single time I had looked away before. Her eyes were begging me. Say something. Do something. Please. My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. My throat closed up, a knot of fear and shame choking off my voice. Kyle just smirked, a cruel, triumphant twist of his lips. "Watch where you're sitting," he mumbled, not even breaking his stride as he walked away. His friends snickered. And me. I broke her gaze. I ripped my eyes away from her pleading face and stared down at my half-eaten sandwich, as if it were the most fascinating object in the world. The moment passed. The cafeteria noise swelled back to its normal level, swallowing the incident whole. Tears streaming down her face, Aisha gathered her belongings and fled from the room. But someone hadn't looked away. A quiet freshman who was always sketching in a notebook had been filming the cafeteria for a school video project. He caught the whole thing on his phone. Kyle's deliberate path, the premeditated swing of his elbow, the brutal impact, Kyle's arrogant smirk, the agony on Aisha's face. And, for a split second at the very end of the clip, he caught me. He caught the exact moment I turned away. That evening, the 10-second video was on Instagram. Then Twitter. By the next morning, it was the lead story on the local news. The clip became a symbol, a brutal and simple narrative. Racist jock assaults black girl in affluent high school. Suddenly, the pristine image of Northwood High was being broadcast everywhere. Our principal released a catastrophically tone-deaf statement about an unfortunate interaction between students, which was like trying to put out a forest fire with a water pistol. The Millers were, rightfully, incandescent with rage. They demanded Kyle's expulsion. But the school board, composed of people whose own kids were friends with Kyle, began to hedge. They tried to reframe it as a hallway tussle. They had the audacity to suggest Aisha was being overly sensitive. They attempted to paint Kyle, a serial tormentor, as a good kid who just made one poor choice. That dismissal, that institutional gaslighting, was the spark that ignited a firestorm. A national activist group got involved and blasted the video across every social media platform imaginable. Suddenly, our small-town incident was a trending topic. Pundits were dissecting the clip on cable news. Our town was branded a modern sundown town, which wasn't historically accurate, but the label stuck. We were the new face of polite, smiling 21st-century racism. The public pressure became immense, until the school had no choice but to act. They announced that an independent third party, a human rights organization, was being brought in to investigate the culture at Northwood High. That's when we first heard her name. Ms. Davies. The inspector was coming. If you're still here with me, don't forget to subscribe, activate notifications, leave your like, and share this video with someone. Section 3. The inspector's arrival. Ms. Davies's arrival felt like a cold front rolling in, dropping the temperature of the entire school overnight. The usual teenage arrogance and loud confidence evaporated, replaced by a tense, paranoid silence. Every student was now a potential witness. Every conversation felt like a potential liability. She commandeered the principal's glass-walled conference room, transforming it from a place for administrative meetings into a stark, intimidating interrogation chamber. Students were called in one by one. First, the freshman who shot the video. Then Aisha's few friends from the art club. Then Kyle's football teammates. Wild rumors flew down the hallways like sparks. She had copies of our group chats. She had a secret file on every single student involved. She had the power to get you expelled and ruin your college applications. The fear was palpable, and my turn came on a Thursday afternoon. A student aide delivered a folded note to my calculus class. Maya Peterson. Report to the conference room immediately. My blood ran cold and my hands started to tremble. Walking down that long, echoey hallway, past the rows of lockers and curious stares, felt like I was walking the Green Mile to my own execution. I hadn't thrown the elbow, but I knew with a certainty that made me sick, that I was guilty. I was guilty of 1,000 silences, of terminal cowardice, of all the tiny betrayals that had paved the road for Kyle's final, ugly act. I sat down across from her, the polished table a vast and empty space between us. She didn't start with the incident. She disarmed me by asking about my classes, my friends, my plans for college. Her voice was calm, almost gentle, which was infinitely more terrifying than if she had been yelling. Then she leaned forward, her eyes locking onto mine. "Tell me about Aisha Miller," she said simply. I stammered out the same bland, meaningless platitudes I'd heard other students use. "She's nice. Quiet. Keeps to herself." Ms. Davies just looked at me, her gaze steady and unwavering. The silence in the room stretched on, growing heavier with each passing second, demanding to be filled with the truth. "It's hard for her here," I finally whispered, my voice barely audible. "Why is it hard, Maya?" she pressed. And then the dam broke. It all just poured out of me in a torrent of shame and regret. The project jokes. The constant, demeaning questions about her hair. The way everyone, including me, ignored her. My voice cracked as I told her about the group project in history, the memory of turning my back on her still so vivid and painful. I told her everything. "You saw what Kyle did in the cafeteria," she stated. It wasn't a question. "Yes," I said, the word catching in my throat. "And you did nothing." I was scared," I stammered, the excuse tasting like ash in my mouth. I knew how pathetic it sounded. "Scared of what, Maya?" she pressed, her voice finally losing its gentle edge, replaced by a sharp, surgical precision. "Were you scared of Kyle? Or were you scared of no longer being popular? Scared of what your friends might think if you stood up for a girl who was being tormented?" Her question hit me like a physical blow, knocking the air from my lungs. It was the raw, ugly, selfish truth I had been trying to hide even from myself. I had traded another human being's dignity and safety for my own social comfort. Hot tears pricked my eyes and began to stream down my face. In the reflection of Ms. Davies's intense gaze, I saw myself for what I truly was. A bystander, a collaborator in cruelty. I was part of the poison. She was pulling at a single thread, but she was about to discover it was attached to the entire rotten tapestry of our community. The elbowing incident wasn't the whole story. It was just the first brutal page of a much darker, more complicated book. Section 4: The Twist. The investigation stretched from days into weeks. Kyle and 2 of his friends were suspended indefinitely. The Millers had filed a formal civil rights complaint with the Department of Education and were preparing a massive lawsuit against the school district. But as Ms. Davies continued her work, her focus seemed to drift away from the cafeteria incident. It was clear she was digging into something deeper, something about Aisha's past. She held long, private meetings with Mr. and Mrs. Miller. She made official requests for Aisha's sealed adoption records. Strange whispers started to circulate that the adoption agency, a long-defunct organization called New Beginnings Adoptions, had a documented history of procedural irregularities. I couldn't understand what any of this had to do with a bullying incident at Northwood High. Then she called me in for a second time. I walked into the conference room. My anxiety ratcheted up to an unbearable level. The atmosphere was completely different. Her legal pads and files were gone. In their place on the table was that single, faded photograph of my young mother. "Maya," she began, her voice softer than I'd ever heard it. "This investigation has uncovered something that none of us could have possibly anticipated. The racism Aisha experienced here is undeniable and inexcusable. But the reason my organization was flagged and got involved, it's far more complicated." That's when she slid the photo across the table toward me. I picked it up, my fingers trembling. My breath caught in my throat. It was my mom, frozen in time at maybe 17, with the same wavy brown hair and green eyes that I see in the mirror every single day. "I don't understand," I whispered, my voice shaking. "Why do you have a picture of my mother?" Ms. Davies took a deep, steadying breath. "We didn't come here because of the elbowing," she repeated softly. "We came because of this." She laid a second document on the table. It was a copy of a birth certificate, dated 17 years ago. Under the field for mother's name, it read, Catherine Peterson. Mum. Then my eyes scanned across the page and I saw the box for the child's name. It was blank. But right next to it, in the space designated for a second child and a multiple birth, was another name. Aisha. My world didn't just stop. It ceased to exist. The air in my lungs turned to ice. My mind refused to process what my eyes were seeing. New Beginnings Adoptions wasn't just irregular, Ms. Davies said, her voice a steady anchor in my swirling vortex of disbelief. It was a criminal enterprise. They specialized in a particularly cruel and racist form of fraud. When a young single mother came to them with biracial fraternal twins, they would often implement what they called a single-child strategy. They would tell the distraught mother that the darker-skinned baby was born sickly and had died shortly after birth. They would falsify a death certificate, even provide a box of ashes. Then they would adopt out the surviving twin through private, untraceable channels, charging the desperate adoptive parents exorbitant, illegal fees. My mind flashed to my own mother. My quiet, gentle mother who grew prize-winning roses and hummed when she baked. The story she had always told me was that I was her miracle baby, the only one she could ever have after a difficult, traumatic pregnancy. It wasn't a story. It was a lie. A monstrous lie she had been forced to believe for 17 years. Your mother was 17, Ms. Davies continued gently, her eyes full of a deep professional compassion. She was alone and terrified. They convinced her that her darker-skinned daughter had passed away from complications. She was given a box of ashes. She grieved for a child she never even knew was alive. And that child was Aisha. Aisha, the girl I had watched get tormented daily. The girl whose silent plea for help I had so callously ignored. She wasn't just a classmate. She was my sister. My twin sister. The shock was absolute, a physical force that left me breathless. Every memory I had of her, every glance, every awkward hallway encounter, replayed in my mind, now cast in a horrifying new light. That strange, inexplicable feeling of familiarity I felt the first time I saw her in the cafeteria. The guilt that had gnawed at me, a guilt that felt so much bigger and deeper than just being a bystander. It wasn't just guilt. It was a primal, cellular recognition. My own body, my own soul, had been trying to tell me who she was, and I had refused to listen. How did you know? I finally managed to choke out. My organization investigates cold cases related to corrupt adoption agencies, she explained. We've been tracking the crimes of New Beginnings for over a decade. When Aisha's story went national, her name and the circumstances of her birth flagged an alert in our system. The Miller's adoption file mentioned the agency's name. It was the missing link we'd been searching for years. Finding you and your mother was the last piece of the puzzle. The bullying incident was just the awful, random coincidence that brought you two into the same building and finally dragged this 17-year-old crime into the light. The human rights inspector wasn't just investigating a hate crime. She was closing a 17-year-old kidnapping case. And the victim and the key to solving it all had been sitting in the same cafeteria, separated by an ocean of secrets, until a bully's elbow shoved them directly into the path of justice. The truth didn't fix everything. In the beginning, it broke everything even more. Telling my mother was the single hardest, most painful thing I have ever had to do. The grief she had carried and suppressed for 17 years came flooding back, a tidal wave of sorrow mixed with a terrifying white-hot rage at the people who had stolen her child. My father, who never knew, was rocked to his core. Our perfect family portrait, the one we proudly displayed on the mantel, was built on an unimaginable lie. And then there was Aisha. And the Millers. Their world was shattered too. The loving parents who had raised her now had to make room for a past she never knew existed, for a mother and a sister who were complete strangers. Meeting Aisha as my sister was impossibly, painfully awkward. What do you possibly say to the twin you never knew you had, whose public suffering you silently witnessed? "I'm sorry" is the most useless and inadequate phrase in the English language. Our first few conversations were filled with long, painful silences, punctuated by tears. There was no instant cinematic reunion. There was just hurt, confusion, and 17 years of lost time that we could never, ever get back. The legal fallout was immense. Our two families, tragically united by trauma, filed a joint lawsuit that blew the lid off the New Beginnings adoption scandal. Our story prompted other families to come forward, unearthing a pattern of lies and separated siblings. It became a landmark case, changing laws around adoption records. Kyle and his friends faced juvenile court, but their punishment felt like a tiny footnote in a much larger story. The real crime wasn't a shove in a cafeteria. It was the theft of a family, the separation of two sisters based on nothing more than the color of their skin. It's been a few years now. The lawsuits are settled. Northwood High has completely overhauled its policies and has a zero-tolerance policy for bullying that they actually enforce. It's a more honest place now, I think. Aisha and I are still figuring it out. We are sisters, but we are also strangers, learning each other's histories, our likes and dislikes. Sometimes I'll look at her and see my mother smile, and my heart will ache with a mix of joy and sorrow. Sometimes she'll look at me, and I know she's thinking about the girl in the cafeteria who looked away. The healing is slow. The scars are deep, and they will likely never fade completely. But we are healing. Together. For a long time, I thought that day in the inspector's office was the day my life ended. But it was just the end of a life built on lies. It was the beginning of a new story. Painful, messy, and complicated, but finally true. A story of two sisters who found each other, not because of destiny or fate, but because one moment of casual cruelty was just loud enough to be heard over the deafening silence of a 17-year-old secret. Thank you for listening to my story. Please subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications, comment below, leave your like, and share this video with others.